I've always loved thunderstorms ever since I was a kid, and so does my 6-year-old son. Anytime there's a storm, my son and I will sit in the backyard under the gazebo and just watch and listen. This was on a hot, stormy August night in Florida. As soon as we heard the first strike of lightning in the living room, my son jumped up and said, "Let's go sit outside." I followed him outside, where we ran from the back door to the gazebo, getting pretty wet on the way. It was already pouring. I have a nice setup under my backyard gazebo. It has a mini bar, a few wicker sofas, a TV, and mini fire pit. As we usually would, I turned on the fire pit and TV, and my son and I just laid back and relaxed, listening to the sound of the pouring rain and constant thunder. The thunder would get louder and louder as we sat out there, and the time between the flashes of lightning and cracks of thunder was getting shorter and shorter. The bulk of the storm was getting closer to us. The lightning was getting so bright and frequent that it was genuinely starting to light up the entire backyard anytime it flashed. And my backyard is big, with woods covering 2 edges of it. Perhaps after the biggest flash of lightning yet, my son squealed and pointed out towards the backyard. "What?" I said, to which he said he saw someone standing in the backyard. I stood up and walked to the edge of the gazebo. I couldn't see anything in the dark, so I was waiting for another flash of lightning. The next few flashes of lightning were too small to fully see into the yard, but when the next earth-rumbling flash of lightning struck, I saw what he meant. There was someone indeed standing out in my backyard by the woods. I told my son to go rush inside and turn on the backyard lights. He did so without question, and I stood in place waiting. About 10 seconds later, all of the backyard lights were on, but I didn't see the person way out in my backyard anymore. I waited for more lightning to maybe help see. But even with the lightning, I didn't see them anymore. They were gone. He, she, whatever, I didn't know. All I knew was that there was someone walking around my yard, and that didn't sit right with me. I went inside the house and locked all the doors, but kept the backyard lights on. I even turned on the front yard lights too. I didn't want to tell my wife, but my son had already done so anyway, so when she was all concerned and asking if we should phone the police, I lied to her and told her I saw the person out there leave. She asked if it was a man or woman, to which I replied woman, as it sounded less scary. For the rest of the night, the 3 of us watched a movie in the living room, with the storm still overhead. Eventually it was my son's bedtime, so my wife tucked him in and then came back to the living room, and we started watching something else. We still heard the thunder outside. Eventually I went back to the den to turn off the outside lights, front and backyard. When I went up to the living room, my son was standing at his bedroom door, scared, saying there's someone at his window. My wife and I looked at each other and yelled, "What?" I pulled him away from his doorway, and then I stood at the doorway, looking at the window, waiting for the lightning. When the lightning struck, no one was at his window, but I believed him. Someone was out there, that much was already established. I told my wife and child to stay inside while I go out and look, even though my wife didn't want me to do that. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and stormed out into the rain after turning all the lights back on. I started in the front of the house, then worked my way to the side, then the back. I looked under the tables, in the gazebo, under the deck, and when I thought the backyard was clear, the last side to check was the right side of the house. I would begin to walk towards the side of the house, and instantly saw a person in a hood, but I only saw half of their face and head. They were peering around the corner of the house. Most of their face and all of their body was hidden behind the wall. If I had to guess, I'd say it looked more like a man. I screamed, but I also ran in that direction with a bat raised up. The person disappeared behind the corner. When I made it past that corner, they were gone. Even with all the lights on, I didn't see anyone there. I went back inside and told the 2 of them that it was okay, that I chased the man away. But my wife did not like to hear that it was a man. I made sure to close all the blinds in the house now. Luckily, we weren't bothered again by that man. My son slept in our bed with us that night just because he was so scared, and I understand why. I didn't see it, but I can only imagine how scarring it was to see a man standing at his window at the young age of 6. The city in which I live almost never gets any rainfall, so when we do, it's a pretty exciting thing. The kids like to go out and play around, the farmers are thankful that their crops will thrive, and it's just a nice piece of scenery. The last time there was a big thunderstorm, my friends and I were all playing some game together, though I can't remember which one it was. I knew the thunderstorm was rolling in when everybody's microphone played the same sound of the first thunder, and it was big. When I heard it, I thought it was a gunshot or firework. Then I saw the lightning outside my window and hopped over to my bed to see the storm forming. What I saw was much more unsettling. Across the street from me was a man. He wore a gray hoodie and some jeans. He looked fairly tall, though not too muscular, and he was just standing there. I couldn't tell if he was looking at me or not, as his face was obscured. Then he started to walk down the street, so he wasn't looking at me. I felt relieved, yet still a bit paranoid. I got back on the game with my friends and we continued to play. About 15 minutes later, the storm had fully started. I told the four of them I was leaving to go watch the storm, and I'd be back in a while. I walked out front and stood under the porch, watching as the lightning flashed and the rain struck the ground in a soothing rhythm. Then I looked down the street to my left, and there he was, the man standing at the corner of the street. I was scared a bit, but I still had my head trying to reason this out. It's not uncommon for townspeople to stand out in the rain. It is a rare occurrence after all, so I paid little attention to it. After about 5 more minutes, I decided to go back inside. And as I opened the door, I turned to where the man had stood. He was gone now, which made for a more eerie scene. I walked inside, where 2 of my little siblings were dancing to a Bubble Guppies song. My other 2 siblings were in their rooms, doing who knows what. I went back to my room, but instead of playing the game again, I decided to go do something else. Though I didn't know what to do. Then I heard the all too familiar buzzing of my phone when I received a text. I picked it up and opened the messenger. It was an unknown number. They had sent me 2 texts. The first read, "Have you forgotten?" And the next read, "I know you didn't." My first thoughts were the man that I had seen outside, but then I thought of how slim those chances were. How would he have gotten my number? Why would he target me for whatever he was trying to do? I decided my friends were pulling a prank on me and decided to check. I went to the group chat and asked if anyone had been prank texting me. They all swore that they weren't, though it's hard to tell over text if they were lying. I decided to believe them and went to watch TV. Some time had passed, how long exactly I don't remember, when there came a ring at the door. It was way too late for visitors, so who could this be? Maybe the postal service? I checked the time on my phone, 12:19, definitely too late for visitors. I peered through my blinds in an effort to see who it was, but I couldn't. The rain was coming down so hard it was like a blanket of mist was everywhere. Then one of the gunshot thunders sounded. My head slammed into the window, making a thud sound. There was movement by the door. It was a person running off. I could only assume it was the man from earlier. No, I knew it was the man from earlier. How could these events not all add up? I wanted to call the cops, but I had no proof the man had been there. He just left without a trace. I decided to try and sleep and got about 3 hours worth, when a gunshot thunder woke me up. I shot up, then froze. Then I relaxed a little, when another loud bang sounded, but this one wasn't thunder. This one came from my window. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't let whoever was out there know I was awake. But what if they knew? I decided to just take a peek through my blinds. What I saw next was probably the scariest thing I'd ever seen. It was the man with his hands pressed against the window, and I could only assume he was staring at me. The scariest part was his mouth. His eyes were mainly covered in shadow, but there was enough light to see his mouth, and it was smiling. It was such a big, maniacal smile I didn't even know was possible for a human to make. Then he stood and left. Just like that, he walked into the rainy night from which he came. I sat awake in my chair, but I guess I fell asleep somewhere along the road. When I woke, I was confused as to why I was in my chair. Then I remembered the previous night's events, and I darted to the window for whatever reason. When I pulled the blinds up, there was one thing I could see. A small piece of paper taped to my window. On it were 3 words that have now haunted my dreams. Have you forgotten? I haven't had any further experience with the man, and I hope I don't have to. It was a night I was working late. The weather outside was awful, and I was just leaving my job to go home. It was about 12 a.m. during a thunderstorm. I used to drive a 2005 Ford Fusion, a little car not ideal for crappy weather and roads. I was taking my usual route home, and the rain was so bad that even having the windshield wipers on the highest setting didn't help that much. I still could barely see. I was going 40 miles per hour on a 55 mile per hour road. That's how bad it was. There were no other cars around me. And when I least expected it, Through the water building up too quickly for my wipers to handle, thus partially blocking my view, I saw someone dressed in white running across the road from one side of the woods to the other. I saw them almost too late. I had to slam on the brakes and swerve to avoid hitting them. I swerved and lost control onto the grass before crashing head-on into a tree. The airbag deployed and my whole body jerked forward into it. I couldn't even believe what just happened at first. I was in shock. I knew immediately my car was totaled, but when I slowly started to accept what just happened, I started to look around my car for the person that just ran across the road randomly. I was currently in the middle of a quiet highway with no buildings nearby for miles and no cars to be seen. There should have been no one walking around here, especially in this weather this late. It was a work night and extremely late, so I was nervous nobody would pick up. The first person I called was my brother, who didn't pick up after several attempts. He was definitely asleep. I tried my sister next, with equal results. I didn't want to have to involve either of my parents in this, but with no other option, I called my dad on his house phone, which was sure to wake him up. He picked up on the last ring, and I explained the situation. I told him I'd need assistance, and didn't know what number to call for a tow. After ensuring that I was okay and that I had no injuries, he gave me the number for our family's roadside assistance company to call. He said he'd get dressed and drive over to me. His house was about 10 to 15 minutes away. My dad also told me to get out of the car to look for whoever was crossing the street and to keep my doors locked. When we hung up, I stayed in the car, nervously looking around every window, though not seeing much because of the pouring rain. I truly was so scared that I was about to piss my pants, knowing someone was out there, wondering if they intentionally ran in front of my car. I called our roadside assistance company, and they were sending a tow truck right away. About 10 minutes passed since the phone call with my dad now, and I texted my dad, "Are you on your way yet?" He texted back, "Yes." I had my hazards on, though I'm sure the car being ran into a tree would help enough in finding me. I turned to my right, as if I instinctively knew someone was there, and I jumped out of my seat and screamed at the top of my lungs as I felt like my heart dropped out of my body. There was a soaking wet man in white, looking into my car with his mouth hung open in an O shape and his eyes squinted. He then put his hands on the glass and started to rub the windows. I didn't know what he was doing, but I yelled at him to go away. He started to try opening the locked door, and when it wouldn't open, he started to pound his fists on the glass. He did all of this with his mouth still hanging open in that weird O shape. I didn't know what to do other than call my dad again. He picked up, and I basically cried into the phone that there was a random man trying to get into my car. My dad screamed into the phone not to open the doors, and that he's almost here. He stayed on the line with me as the man outside started to hit the window with his elbow, causing me to scream and my dad to panic into the phone. Surprisingly, the glass didn't shatter, and as if my prayers were answered, I saw headlights approaching from down the road and pull up behind my car. The man outside looked to the other car, which happened to be my dad's, and as my dad stepped out of his car and charged at this creep, the creep tried to run away into the woods, but my dad tackled him, and I swear beat his face in to the point that his face would have been completely covered in blood if it weren't for the heavy rain washing some of it away. He held the man down as I called the police. The tow truck driver arrived on scene first, and he was of course shocked at the unusual scenario he just pulled up to. Police showed up not long after that, and it was the most satisfying feeling seeing that man arrested. Not only was he charged criminally, but we pressed charges for the damages to my car. His name is Marcus Green. I never showed up to court. My father and our lawyer did. I didn't want to see that man ever again. The disturbing face he was making, along with seeing him striking my car to break in, is something that will stay with me for a long time.